fast. And I always encourage you that if you feel like we need to fast, then you need to fast. Okay? You need to fast. If God has laid that on your heart, I encourage you to fast. It is a good discipline to get involved in if you are a Christian. But we decided, and we were talking about it, and Pastor Ali had shared that God had kind of laid a book on his heart, and he had picked up this book on fasting, and I'd been talking about passion and getting out and talking about reaching out to community and all this kind of stuff, and we just kind of said, you know what, I think now is the time for us to do a corporate fast. So we invite you to do that again. That starts tomorrow and runs through the 30th. For those of you who are not familiar with fasting and what it is, I want to talk a little bit about that today. My thought for the night is the God fast, and hopefully you'll understand why I title it that here in a few minutes. But fasting in and of itself is a willful abstinence of food. The word fasting literally comes from a Hebrew word which means to cover the mouth, which means you don't put anything in it, okay? That's what it means, and the thought came to my mind as well. It's not part of my notes, but when you cover the mouth, not only does it mean you don't put anything in it, it means you probably shouldn't let anything come out either. Sometimes we need to stop and listen, and that's kind of what fasting is about. It's about that opportunity to stop and listen to what God is trying to speak to you. So it's a great discipline to get into. This is something that we're all familiar with, this concept of fasting. We do it every night. In fact, when you go to bed at night, you fast. That's the reason the first meal of the day is called break fast. It's there because you have not eaten all night long, and now all of a sudden you're eating again. Okay? So that's what breakfast means. So for those of you who didn't know that as well, you're breaking your fast. So fasting is going without food, and you do it to establish some discipline over your body. The idea of being able to tell your body no. Food, hunger is one of your deepest desires. It's one of those things that you cannot live without. Most people can go about 40 days without food before you begin to wither away to nothing and the wind blows you out the door. Some of us could probably use that. But it's talking about being able to control that. Because when your body starts crying out for food or whatever it is. Has anybody here like a big Mountain Dew fan? Soda pop, all that kind of stuff. I remember the first time I ever fasted, I decided I was going to give up pop. And I tell you what, about after the first day, I had a headache that felt like my head was going to explode. And the reason for that is because your body goes through some detoxification. You literally go through withdrawal from some of these things. And your body begins to scream out for satisfaction. It doesn't like it when you tell it no, but it's something that we as Christians need to learn to do. Because if you can do that through food and telling your body, no, we're not going to take that, even though I really see that chocolate cake there and I want it, I promised I'm not going to eat it. So it becomes that battle. But then that also transmits into other things in your life. It helps you to say no to other desires that you might have. Desires over addictions, desires over relationships, desires over various things in your life. So it can definitely become a discipline, all right? But tonight I want to kind of talk a little bit about this idea of fast, because if you read in the Bible and if you can pick up books and all this kind of stuff, you'll hear about a lot of different kinds of fasting. There are many different kinds. For instance, there's the personal fast, or what I call the personal fast, and that's when you give up a certain thing that normally you could not live without. I'm giving up my morning coffee. I'm giving up my Starbucks. I'm giving up my Mountain Dew. I'm giving up whatever it is. Something that you just normally couldn't live without, and you just make up your mind. You say, what? For this fast, I'm gonna stop eating that, or I'm gonna stop drinking that for this time. Okay? That's a personal fast. There's what the Bible, or what people call the Daniel fast, and if you're familiar with the story of Daniel in the Bible, Daniel basically gave up bread, gave up meat for a time of fasting, and basically ate vegetables. He ate nuts and seeds and drank water and those types of things. So there's the Daniel fast that people can partake in. There's also what I could call a full fast, which is what Jesus did. That was 40 days and 40 nights with nothing, no water, no food. That's what we call a full fast. If you decide to do a full fast for 40 days, you better make sure God's calling you to do that. Because otherwise somebody's going to be over picking you up off the floor. I know one gentleman in my lifetime that actually has done that, and I tell you what, I was amazed. He literally did no food, no water for 40 days, and just amazed me, because I don't think I could do that. I struggle to go a day, okay? I get hungry between breakfast and lunch. So sometimes we have to be careful on that. But there's the full fast, and then there's also what some people call a partial fast, which is where you choose certain things that you'll eat. I'm going to eat this, but I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to eat beans and rice the whole time. You make up your own fast, your partial fast. You can also fast for different amounts of time. There can be a one-day fast. You can fast for part of a day. You can fast for 3 days. You can fast for a week. You can fast for 40 days, whatever it is. There's no set time limit on fasting. And for those of you who are interested in more information about those kinds of fasts, we did provide a guide over there on the Welcome Center. You can pick that up. It just kind of shares some more about those things. But tonight, I want to talk about another type of fast that's not on the list. It's a fast that most people don't talk about when it comes to fasting. And in fact, unfortunately, it's one that most people don't even know about. And it's what I call the God fast. Whatever fasting you choose to do, it really doesn't matter to me. And in fact, I would go as far as to say it doesn't matter to God what you choose to fast. But this particular fast, what I call the God fast, is really what matters when it comes to fasting. This fast that I call the God fast is essential if you're looking for a breakthrough in your life. If you're looking for God to change something in your life, if you're looking for God to break through something, then the only way, or one of the most important ways, is through the God fast. Jesus himself said that some things come not but by prayer and fasting. And I really don't think that Jesus was talking about the ritual fasting that we think of. In fact, Jesus was very much against ritual and rules and all that kind of stuff. But I believe what he was talking about was a God fast. That's where you get your breakthrough. And without doing a God fast, you're doing nothing more than a crash diet. Okay? And God's not calling us to crash diets. He's calling us to make an impact. So let's jump in tonight as we talk about the God fast. Beginning in Isaiah chapter 58, beginning in verse 3, it says, "Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast ye find pleasure, and exact all your labors. Behold, you fast and strife and debate, and you smite with the fist of wickedness. Ye shall not fast as you do this day, to make your voice heard on high. Is it such a fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast, and an acceptable day of the Lord?" See, in Isaiah chapter 58, the prophet is speaking to the people who are being invaded by the Assyrian army. At this point, Assyria has taken over every city, every village except Jerusalem. And the prophet is speaking from Jerusalem, and the people decided, we need to fast. The enemy is about to overrun us. We're going to fast. So what do? They start going through this ritual. And what they would do is they would take scratchy sackcloth, potato sacks basically, and they would wear them so that it would show that they were afflicting themselves, that they weren't going to be comfortable. They were willing to get uncomfortable for God, and they would put on itchy stuff. And if that wasn't good enough, they were going to put ashes on the ground, and they were going to sit in the dirty ashes. And they would take the ashes and they'd put them on their head, and they'd rub them on their face so that everybody around them would see that they're fasting. And they would do all of this stuff in order to gain favor from God. If I do all this stuff, God's going to deliver me. But yet the prophet says the people are upset because God's not answering. It's as if they're fasting, but God doesn't even realize it. He's not taking notice of anything that they're doing. He's continuing to ignore it, and the Assyrians are continuing to take over. And he looks at the people and he says, do you not understand that this is not the kind of fast that is going to get me to listen to you? Unfortunately, this is the kind of fast that most of the church participates in. This ritual fasting. I'm going to not eat. I'm going to not bathe. Please bathe. But people would spend the time afflicting their soul, hoping that they were going to gain some favor with God. They would not eat. They would not drink. They'd sit in ashes. They wouldn't bathe. They'd wear itchy stuff. They would bow themselves to the ground. They would lay face down in the dirt, and they would crawl to the altar. They would do all this kind of stuff, thinking that it was somehow going to get them favor with God. They were afflicting their souls in hopes that the Assyrian army would be defeated. But it didn't seem to be working, and the people were asking why. Why isn't God honoring our fast? But God, through the prophet Isaiah, says it's because you really don't understand what it means to fast. You're doing a ritual fast. He says, but this is not the kind of fast that I have called for. They had turned fasting into a religious ritual. We have to guard against this. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing is not a ritual. It's not just motions that we go through so that hopefully we can grab God's arm and twist it just right to get him to do what we're wanting him to do. Fasting is not manipulating God. Fasting really is not about changing God at all. It's about changing you. God wants to change us. We've turned fasting into a list of self-imposed rules designed to afflict our souls. And we're asking God to give us favor because of it. And what we end up doing is going through motions of fasting. But yet, he said, even in this, the people, they were afflicting themselves, but it really didn't change their life. They were still doing the same things that they always did. They were still going about their business. Everyday business, just like they had before they started fasting. They were going about their business. They were transacting business back and forth. It was if they hadn't changed anything they were doing, except now they were dirty and itchy while they did it. But nothing else had changed. And God says it shouldn't be this way. He says you're still finding pleasure. You're still doing your normal business. And he said it shouldn't be that way. Jesus himself dealt with this in his time. When he came to, and he saw the people who were all dressed up in their religious garb, and in Matthew 6:16, he says they walk about to display how they're fasting. He says you shouldn't be like that. He said you should wash your face, anoint your head. You shouldn't make it external appearance that you're fasting. He said because it's not for everybody else to see. He said it's something that needs to happen on the inside more than the outside. He addressed that same religious spirit. Your fasting should be about, again, what's on the inside and not what's on the outside. These people were going through motions. And they were doing it for the wrong reason, because the whole reason they decided to fast to begin with was to destroy somebody else. God, get them. As if God is some dog on a chain that we can say, sick 'em. And hope God's going to run out there and just chase them off. God doesn't work that way. God does not work that way. God does not want us to fast so that we can prove ourselves right and someone else wrong. He doesn't want us to fast so that we can somehow gain the upper hand over somebody else. That's not the reason for fasting. God wants us to fast for a totally different reason. He says, if that's the way you're going to fast, don't expect God to hear your cry. He says, that's not going to get your voice heard on high. The ritual of fasting is not how you gain favor with God. The way you get God to hear your prayer is to do a God fast. If you look at verse 6, it says, is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, that you break every yoke, Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? And when you seest the naked, that you cover him, and that you hide not thyself from thine own flesh. A God fast is not about afflicting yourself as much as it is about bringing relief to those that are afflicted. That's a fast. That's a fast, is when you suddenly realize that it's not just about me going without food, but it's me going without food so that I can sympathize with the fact that there are people who do this every single day. There are people who go days and weeks and months and die because of hunger. It helps me understand their compassion. It helps me to realize that there are people today who don't have a warm bed to sleep in. In fact, they sleep out on the cold ground. He says that is the kind of fast. That is the kind of fast that I would have you to do. If you're going to do a fast, take note of the people around you. It takes me back to last week's message when I talked about passion and how we need to develop a passion. We need to start realizing and looking around us and develop a passion. And a passion is not a desire to do something. A passion is not an overwhelming want to do. Passion is quite the opposite. Passion is a deep sorrow within yourself that you just can't ignore. That's passion. God wants us to develop that kind of passion so that when we look around and we see people who are in need, there's something within us that will not let us sleep at night unless we do something. I can't stand to just stand by and watch this family live in their car. I got to do something. I can't watch this person who digs through the trash every week. I can't watch him do that without doing something. It becomes a passion within you. Something that is so overbearing sorrow that you just cannot help but do something. It drives you to action. This is a God fast. A true fast is not just doing without food, but it's more about turning your attention away from yourself and focusing on someone else. That's a God fast. It's not a time to be self-centered, but it's a time of self-evaluation. To ask yourself, God, am I really living this out the way you've called me to live it out? Am I just going through ritual motions? Am I just going to church? Am I just standing and singing the songs because that's what everybody else is doing? Am I just reading my Bible because of peer pressure? Or is it something deeper that really puts a desire in your heart to want to do something for other people? He says you should not hide yourself from your own flesh. It's a time of self-reflection. In other words, oftentimes when we fast, we pretend. And not only when we fast, but in our everyday life. We put on a mask. And we walk around like everything's okay. You see people in church and they say, how are you? Oh, I'm so blessed. But inside you're dying. Inside you're empty. Inside you feel like you could crawl under a rock and just stay there. Don't hide from your own flesh. Sometimes we want to pretend that we don't have any struggles. We don't have any sins that we deal with. Bless God, I got full of victory and I'm just doing great. That's a lie. Because there is no temptation taking you except that which is common to man. In other words, if you're struggling with pornography, chances are somebody else is too. If you're struggling with alcohol, somebody else probably is too. If you're struggling with this or that, chances are somebody else in the church is struggling too. Quit hiding your flesh from yourself and acting like, no, I got it all together. This time of fasting is an opportunity for those things to come to the surface so that we can deal with them. That's what God is looking for us to do, to deal with the issues that we have. He doesn't turn us away because we have issues. Just like we talked about today. He doesn't put us in the valley and go, man, you're really messed up. I'm going to go wait for you. When you get all better, you come see me because I can't hang out with you. That's not how God is. That's how we are sometimes. But that's not how God is. God says, man, you're really messed up. But here, let me help you. Take you by the hand and he walks you through. And while you're following him, I guarantee you're going to trip. I guarantee you're going to fall down. I guarantee you're going to mess up again. And when you do, Here's the great thing about God. He doesn't go, man, you're slowing me down. Instead, he goes, man, you fell down again. Come on. Get back up. Walk it a little further. Come on. 2 more steps. He's there. He's there for you all the time. That's the way God is. He doesn't ignore you, and he doesn't put you out because you have issue. He helps you through the issue. Fasting is a time to look within. To ask the question like, why am I fasting? Am I doing it because everybody else is? Or am I doing it because I really have a desire for God to speak to me? When you start focusing on other people, it will cause you to look more critically at yourself. There's nothing more important. I remember times when I was like, man, I'm tired. I'm tired. But yet you see somebody else who has worked 3 times as much as you have. Somebody who is up 3 days at a time sometimes. And you realize, man, I ain't got no reason to be tired. When you start talking about, man, I'm so poor, I can't pay this and I can't pay that, and then you realize that there are people who don't even have that to pay. And you realize that you're not as poor as you thought you were. When you talk about being hungry and you look at children who are dying overseas, you realize that you're not as hungry as you thought you were. When you start focusing on other people, it puts your life into perspective. And that's what fasting is all about. You will see people have less than you do. You will see that people are not concerned about TV and video games because they're concerned about whether or not they're going to live tomorrow. It puts your life in a whole different perspective when you start focusing on other people. It gives you a different perspective and a new way to look at yourself while you fast. So a God fast is about helping others. It's about forgiving others, setting them free, and serving them. Isaiah goes on to say, 58, beginning in verse 8. He says, if you'll do these things, if you will set the oppressed free, if you will lighten their burden, if you will break the yoke off of people. In other words, don't put more stuff on them. I didn't put this in my notes, but let me say this to clarify. This is what Jesus had an issue with. Because the Pharisees and all these religious people had decided that they were going to tell people what they needed to do when they fast. And as a result, they were taking all these rules like a big yoke and placing them on the shoulder of everybody else. And with no thought, with no understanding of the fact that this person may not be able to carry that kind of a load. And then when he crumbles under the weight, they point fingers. If you were righteous, you wouldn't struggle with that. If you were right with God, then you wouldn't do that. Well, if you hadn't put that on their neck to begin with, it wouldn't have been an issue. And that's what Jesus was dealing with. He says, but if you will break that yoke, if you will set people free instead of giving them more stuff to do, set them free to be what God's called them to be. If you will do that, he says in verse 8, he says, then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine shall spring forth, and thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. And thou shalt call, and the Lord shall answer, and shall cry, and thou shalt cry, and he shall say, here I am. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, and speaking vanity, if thou draw out thy soul to the hungry, and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise in obscurity, and thy darkness be as the noonday. And the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water whose waters fail not. In other words, Israel, if you will start focusing your attention on other people, quit trying to afflict yourself and start healing the afflictions of others, then you'll get everything you've been looking for. people fast because they want God to heal them. He says, if you'll do this, if you'll break the yoke, if you'll stop pointing the finger at other people, if you'll just help them, if you'll set them free, he says, then your healing will come speedily. Right? That's what he says. He goes on and he says, if you'll quit pointing the finger, if you'll do this, he said, prosperity will be upon you. He'll put fat on your bones. That's what it means, prosperity. Because if you are prosperous, that means you're eating well. That means you're fat. Okay? That's why I tell you I'm prosperous. I'm just prospering. That's what God is looking for us to do. He's looking for us to fast in this way. He says, if you'll partake in a God fast instead of a religious fast, he says you will see a breakthrough. The breakthrough that you've been looking for. He says it will break forth like the morning. If you will do a God fast, he says your health will come quickly. And you'll find true righteousness. And you will find God. It's as you fast God's way that your prayers are answered. He says he will listen if you will learn to set people free. Because that's the kind of stuff God's involved in. If he knows you're the one setting people free, he wants to be a part of that. He don't want to be a part of selfishness. He wasn't selfish. He don't like selfish people. He'll forgive you, but he don't like selfish people. God is looking for us to start looking outward to other people. He says we need to learn to listen to what other people need and to set them free. Stop pointing fingers at each other and fighting amongst one another. Stop trying to outdo the church next door. It's not about that. A God fast is not about going hungry, but giving yourself to the hungry. It's not about afflicting your soul, but bringing relief to the afflicted. And if we will do that, then others will see our good works and glorify God. That's what God is calling us to. These next 27 days, don't just not eat. Get out amongst your community and help somebody. Start developing some passion in your life. Look around and see people that are hurting a whole lot more than you are. A whole lot more than I am. Because I'm blessed enough to have a home to go to. I'm blessed enough to have a family who cares. That's not the case for everybody. Tonight we're going to go back here and we're going to eat. There are people who haven't eaten for days. Understand that. God is calling us to reach out to them. Let your light shine in the darkness is what he says. He says, then God will speak to us, guide us, direct us. Then we will find the peace that we've been seeking. Then we will be filled. Then we will be refreshed. Then it says you'll be like a fountain that never ends. When you learn to fast God's way, that's how you live in the flow. If you remember us talking about that, God wants to fill you up so that you can pour it out to other people. God wants you to be a broken vessel full of holes and full of cracks so that every time he pours it in, it just runs out. And he wants you to stay filled, which means you got to stay in the flow so that you can constantly be giving to other people. That's the reason you are blessed. That's the reason God is blessing you. That's the reason he's pouring into you so that you can pour to other people. So tomorrow, I challenge you to join me in a God fast. Again, if you want to ritualistically fast, there is some good discipline in that. Learning to tell your body no, learning to do those types of things, it's good. But if you got to choose one fast, I suggest you do a God fast.